Today is the 20th of September, 2016. And our topic is the unreliability of polls on the eve of the first official debate in Hempstead, Long Island at Hofstra College. Next Monday, the 26th, we'll have the Hofstra debate, and then the following week, we will criticize the results of that. But the discussion today is between Dave Dewitt of the Athens News, and I am Robert Whaley, retired historian at Ohio University, and this is the Athens Speakout, number 381. So by way of introduction, the Cleveland Convention, where the Republicans ended in total disunity, although Donald Trump won the primary election as a personality from the very beginning. But the party as a whole were disunited of what they were going to do about the loose cannon called Donald Trump. The Philadelphia Convention came later, and Hillary ended that convention with a unity of the Democratic Party. On the 28th of July, the right and left factions inside the Democratic Party came together, and Christian religion seemed to be coming back, and Hillary then was campaigning as a loyal Methodist and claimed that her understanding of Christianity was better than Donald Trump's weak Presbyterianism. So anyway, we are going to start off with a few leftovers from the Philadelphia Convention that we didn't complete. And then we'll talk about how the pundits will handle the polling. So, going back to the 28th of July, the first question to my colleague, Dave Dewitt, is what do you think of Hillary Clinton's pick of Governor Tim Kaine of Virginia as the vice presidential candidate?
I think it was a smart, safe choice. I think that she needs to win Virginia, and he's going to do a long way. He's going to go a long way to help her win Virginia. It's kind of a must-win for her. I don't think that he's a choice that rattles any cages. There in
Depends
his
where.
Safeness.
Depends what state.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a lot of states out there that
he's going to win? He's going to win Virginia, right?
That's what she's hoping. She's
yeah, and he's going to be strong in the southern states, Florida, Georgia, where Hillary had some wins because he is a conservative, relatively conservative Catholic.
Yeah, he's not the fire-breathing leftist
Right.
that maybe Bernie supporters
Right.
wanted, but I don't think that she wanted to go that route. I think it was more important to her to win in the South and places like Virginia.
Yeah, right. So it's one of the swing states. North Carolina is another
Right.
possibility.
Right, and she wants to do as much as she, and Georgia even, she wants to do as much as she can to try to capture those typically Republican strongholds.
Right. So I looked at Chris Hayes, and Chris Hayes was a leftist, but he said Tim Kaine, who was a boring speaker, but he was honest, he was honorable. He's respected by both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, and he's going to be discussing the issues and not personalities. And his wife has a good job as a missionary. She's got a religious background, and they have been missionaries in Honduras, helping the poor there. Kaine defeated two Republicans in Virginia, and he had experience in Richmond as mayor. Then he went to the state legislature Then he became a relatively liberal governor in Virginia, but conservative the way the nation looks at it. So he is a good pick, and there's a tradition for that. If we go back to Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932, he picked the conservative John Vance Garner from Texas to be his vice presidency. And John F. Kennedy in 1960 picked LBJ, vice president from Texas, so that the two sides of the Democratic Party, the South and the North, the conservatives and the liberals, are necessary to win on a national basis. John F. Kennedy in 1960 picked LBJ as his vice president. And then when Kennedy was shot, Vice President Johnson moved the party to the right. Bill Clinton had a strange pick. He picked Al Gore from Tennessee. Arkansas and Tennessee were two old Upper South states, and there was something strange about that pick. And ultimately, it backfired. The idea was that the two Southerners would pick up the Old South. But when Gore took over from Clinton, they had a little bit of a rivalry. And Gore didn't make it in 2000 for strange reasons.
Yeah, he kind of did. The Supreme Court kind of didn't
Well,
let
he
him.
came close.
Yeah.
But they had a little bit of a rivalry.
Oh, yeah, no, they were longtime rivals, actually, like
Right.
long before he
In
selected
other words,
Gore as his VP.
Gore didn't like the Christian credentials of Clinton. He knew that Clinton was kind of corrupt from the beginning.
Yeah.
So he came across as the so-called boring candidate. Anyway, it backfired because two Southerners seemed to work in the South, but it didn't quite work nationally. Well, anyway, George W. Bush was pushed by Kissinger, and Kissinger used the old balance of power to get Nixon out of the Vietnam War. So the Kissinger then had a tremendous influence on as national security advisor in the Nixon administration, and some people call the Nixon administration this odd couple. An anti-Semite in the hands of Nixon, but Kissinger had to cooperate in order to unite the Republican Party, and he was the appointee of Nelson Rockefeller. Mm-hmm. Nelson Rockefeller said, "I'll support you, Dick Nixon, if you bring Kissinger in there."
Right.
Because Nelson Rockefeller was the liberal wing of the then split party, and Kissinger was not a racist, and Rockefeller was not a racist because he dealt in international oil diplomacy. So that then changed the whole style of debating. Anyway, Nixon went on to a personal victory in 1972, but that was an ambiguous victory because he lost the Vietnam War. It unraveled under the Watergate investigation. Mm-hmm. So Nixon then was impeached, had to resign, and then Kissinger has tremendous influence on Ford, and Ford was totally in the hands of Henry Kissinger as Secretary of State, and he didn't know anything about foreign policy. And so Ford was a kind of a transitional character. Mm-hmm. He didn't do any damage, but he didn't have many...
He's kind of a placeholder.
Yeah, placeholder. And then Ford was defeated by Jimmy Carter, And the debate goes from anti-communism to the Middle East problems, and that's
Right.
where it is today. So Kissinger is a vital influence on the presidential race. You have a comment or question about this?
Back when Bill Clinton was impeached, instead of stepping aside, a lot of Democrats wanted him to step aside so that Al Gore could take that position. And I hear this all the time. If Al Gore would have taken over for Bill Clinton, we wouldn't have had a George Bush 43.
That's possible.
Because, he would have been in office for that, and, that would have probably put him over the top.
There's always going to be a Monday morning quarterback.
That's true.
And you never know, because history is what did happen,
Right.
not what might have happened.
Right. Exactly.
But it's
But, I don't think Clinton could have been thinking of the party when he didn't step aside and let Gore take over,
well, that's Gore's interpretation.
So,
Hard to fathom a Clinton not putting party before self.
But I don't know of any. I don't know of any president who had the incumbency who turned it over to his vice president. Be there any precedent for that? Has there ever been a president who?
well, when
I mean, when Roosevelt was president, he was the big cheese. He didn't know
Yeah.
anything about Truman. That was
Yeah,
done.
but when you're talking about Richard Nixon being forced to resign,
He didn't do it for the benefit of his vice
but
president.
what I'm saying is then they brought Ford in, and then Ford was already in, but evidently he wasn't strong enough to beat Jimmy Carter.
Well, you
what
see-
I'm saying is if you would have had Al Gore in position for so many months until the election,
Well,
perhaps he could have beat
you're
Bush.
going into the details of the Watergate problem. And the Watergate problem is that Nixon had appointed Spiro Agnew as his vice president.
right,
And he was more corrupt than Nixon. He was an old Baltimore hack, okay?
yeah.
So then people said, well, it looks like Nixon might be impeached. So the Republican Party said, well, we got to get a better vice president candidate.
Right.
So they put pressure on Agnew to resign. And then they brought in Ford,
Ford. Yeah.
because Ford was an honest Republican.
Right.
There was no dirt on Grand Rapids, Michigan. Grand Rapids, Michigan was one of the, and he was an Episcopalian, and that was one of the cleanest states in the Republican Party. So Ford then was a safe pick
Yeah.
for Nixon and Kissinger if Nixon were impeached. And as predicted, he didn't lose. See, in other words, Kissinger was very clever. He knew that Nixon would probably not survive Watergate.
Right.
And he said, Dick, in order to protect the party, you better get rid of Agnew. And he did. So that was the odd couple. Those guys were, and of course Rockefeller was in on it, and who else played a big role was George Bush 41.
Yeah.
He had a cover for Nixon.
Right.
And he was disillusioned when Nixon had to resign.
Yeah.
He
He was the director of the CIA.
well, no, before that he was
Prior to that.
before that he was the Republican National Committee,
Yeah.
and Nixon said, "Well, you got to take that in order to build up my support in the 48 states." So Ford, believing Nixon was not responsible for this. So then when the Watergate people came out and said, yeah, Nixon was covering up, Nixon is a crime, Ford was absolutely devastated. He said, I lied to a whole country. He was an honest Republican. Ford. So then he got the CIA as a consolation prize.
Right.
Well, you can go to China and you can get in on the Chinese market. So George W. Bush, the good George Herbert Walker Bush,
Right,
not
41.
W. Yeah, he built a new career. And it was George W. Bush who got into corruption.
Yeah.
But I think George Herbert Walker was the relatively honest Bush.
Yeah.
He's the most honest Republican since Eisenhower. On many.
Presidential level.
Yeah, on the presidential level.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those are good questions. So anyway, do you have any more comments about Kaine and the pick there and his role in the South?
Yeah, I just to reiterate what I said, I don't think that he's. I think he was a nice, safe choice for her.
But we don't know how it's going to work out.
No, of course not.
It's a gamble.
I don't think that he's a guarantee in any way that she'll win any southern states other than Virginia. And I'm not even sure how much of a guarantee he is for Virginia.
There's no guarantees in the election.
But,
No, there's no guarantee.
well, she's going to win New York. I would call that a guarantee. Most
Yeah,
of the
New York, right.
northeastern states in California,
Yeah,
stuff
okay,
like that.
right.
But you're right. I mean,
Yeah,
in
Texas.
essence,
Texas is.
In essence, there's no
Texas is
guarantee,
guaranteed for.
yeah,
The
Trump.
senator there,
Yeah.
not
Oh,
Trump.
Cruz?
Cruz.
Yeah.
Cruz will come back if Trump loses next time.
Oh, absolutely, he will. Actually, I was just writing about that today. How the defeat of Trump will not mean the defeat of Trumpism. I think Trumpism, because John Kasich is feuding with the chairman of the Republican National Committee right now, Reince Priebus. Priebus was on one of the Sunday shows talking about how people who don't fall in line, such as our Ohio governor, the party might prevent them from seeking the nomination in 2020 somehow, which I don't buy for a second. I don't think that Reince Priebus has any power whatsoever within his party or power to control it. I think he demonstrated that perfectly throughout this entire year.
Yeah.
But it led to Kasich releasing a statement to the effect that he shouldn't have to, endorse Trump or anything because he's still, the adult in the room, essentially, is what he's trying to play. But I just think that Kasich, as much as he wants to be that kumbaya uniter type guy who presents the diametric opposite of what Trumpism stands for, at least within the Republican Party, I don't think it's going to work out for him, because I don't think that Trumpism, even if Trump loses this election, I don't think the essential things of what he stands for within the party are going to go away. I think a person like Cruz is much more likely to come in and step up to the plate next in 2020.
I have no predictions. You're the predicting man.
All right.
I'm the historian who.
You analyze what happens.
What happened, right? But anyway, I guess I'm finished with that prediction of vice presidential candidates and what might have happened. And we want to go to one more sensational speech following Hillary's campaign speech on the 28th of July at Philadelphia. This sensational speech really was far better than Hillary herself. It's a good thing she put him at the end. It's the story of Captain Khan, Captain Humayun Khan. And he was a U.S. captain who joined as a kid ROTC, the University of Virginia. His parents came from the Middle East. And Captain Khan sacrificed his life and went into a planted bomb in the Iraq War and saved American Christian lives. Anyway, the story then at the convention was told by his father and mother at Philadelphia. And the father's name was Kizia Khan, and the mother's name was Gahana Khan. And they were both at Philadelphia, and they gave the big surprise speech, probably of all time. And he denounced Donald Trump. And he took out a little copy of the Constitution, and he said, "Donald Trump, have you ever read this Constitution? And if you haven't, I'll give you this copy."
Yeah,
I have a little
line.
pocket copy. So the Democrats went wild with cheers. I went wild with cheers.
I think that's the same. That's a takeoff from Ron Paul. Used to hand that out to congressmen. and ask them if they ever read the Constitution. Most of them would just drop their head and look the other way.
Well, I'm glad you brought that
I
up.
don't.
Yeah.
I
Ron
honestly
Paul-
think that it's a valid question.
Yes, absolutely.
I
valid.
don't think that Donald Trump, I mean, even yesterday, he proved again that he has no idea what core American principles of the Constitution are all about. He said that the terrorist person in New York doesn't deserve defense counsel.
Yeah.
And while in his mind that may be true, and while the impulse of many Americans might want to deny that man defense counsel, it's totally antithetical to the core principles of our country and our
Yeah.
democratic republic, and it's unconstitutional.
Right.
It's not only unconstitutional, I would consider it anti-constitutional.
Sure.
It's anti-Magna Carta. It goes back that far. I mean, it rejects due process of law, and I don't think it's a gotcha question to ask Mr. Trump to explain
great
his
question.
understanding of the U.S. Constitution, because I don't think that he has one.
And-
The ACLU did an analysis of his proposals, and they said that he has essentially throughout this campaign promised to violate or ignore or otherwise,
Except for one amendment. The
disestablish.
Second Amendment, he's
Yeah,
for.
yeah, all
That's
the
the
rest
only
of them.
amendment that counts.
Specifically, they said they were able to specifically show the 1st, the 4th, the 5th, the 8th,
Right.
and several other ones.
That's right. That's absolutely true.
So I don't think that's a gotcha question to
No,
have
it's
your
no gotcha
presidential
question.
candidates
Absolutely
know
not.
basic 8th grade level civics.
Right.
And I don't think that he does.
That's absolutely true. I agree 100%. Now, my memory goes back when I heard that speech to LBJ in 1964, who launched the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and got involved in an unconstitutional Vietnam War and became an imperial president. And I thought of Wayne Morse, who voted against that Johnson stunt, and Senator Fulbright and Major Dobbs. Fulbright was a critic of the imperial presidents, and he then exposed Johnson after Johnson got involved in the war, and we had a long debate about Vietnam, and that led to Eugene McCarthy and George McGovern, and they all claimed the unwinnable war, the unconstitutional war, and these are imperial presidents. So that really rung my bell.
Absolutely. Didn't you end up voting in 1964 for a protest candidate?
I did exactly that. I did not vote for Lyndon Johnson because I had a secret ace in the hole, so to speak. Johnson's going to win in any case.
Right, yeah.
But
That's
anyway,
the type of thing where you can't
yeah,
cast
so
a protest
I
vote.
said, for my conscience, I'm going to vote for the Socialist Labor Party.
Okay.
And then I said, at least I'll read in the next day that there were 6 votes for the Socialist Labor.
Right.
But then I was disillusioned because when the Democrats and Republicans count votes, they throw the third party away in the basket
Yeah.
because there's no third party
Right.
counter. So the third party can never win, and not since the Republican Party. The Republican Party is the last third party that ever made it into the big leagues.
Yeah. That was in 1860. Even Teddy Roosevelt, a former president at the time, couldn't
he
mount a
tried
successful third-party candidacy.
He pulled the bull moose stunt.
The bull
and
moose,
it got Wilson elected.
Yeah, right. It got the Democrat elected. It split the Republican Party. But if a person as full force as Teddy Roosevelt can't do it,
Right.
it's hard to imagine.
Well, I think that Ross Perot
Many
helped elect
figures.
Bill Clinton.
Yeah,
Bill
no,
Clinton got
sure.
in with 42% of the vote,
Sure, yeah.
and that made him a weak president from the word go.
Right, because he didn't have the mandate of a clear majority.
Yeah, right. So anyway, I think this was good historical understanding. Now, the Jewish veterans came out too, and they blasted Trump, saying that Trump is totally unworthy of contempt. because they too were against Trump, and they could see Joe McCarthy. They could see fascism in Trump. Okay, so the demagogue comes back. You say Trump is going to continue. Well, McCarthyism was eventually undermined. Now, I think Trumpism could be undermined in the next 4 years. Could be.
Yeah.
Or it may survive.
I just think that Hillary Clinton is going to,
It should be a one-term president in any case.
and that's kind of what I was writing about. And I don't think that the Republican Party is going to much moderate themselves during her tenure. I think they're going to be just as obstructionist and just as intransigent and just as accusatory.
Regardless of who gets in, they're going to be one term.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I think most.
Age factor.
Yeah, the age factor alone, but also just both of their deep unpopularity.
Right.
And so I guess what I was kind of writing about today was how Kasich is trying to set himself as this kind of kumbaya uniter, but I don't think that the Republican Party is going to be looking for a kumbaya uniter in 2020. I think they're going to be looking for a hero warrior who took on the criminal incumbency of the Clinton presidency. And but you know, I'm just a journalist here.
Well,
making predictions.
I have no predictions because my attitude toward polling goes back to Harry S. Truman in 1948.
Oh, the Dewey defeats Truman headline?
When he holds up the Chicago Tribune, Dewey wins.
Yeah.
But the reason for Truman's victory was he didn't have television. That's
true.
the problem today. Television can game the system.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I wrote a column about that in the A News, actually, about the role of television and it's the anti-intellectualism in America.
And that's one of the things that killed McCarthy. He didn't quite capture television.
Yeah.
He got on radio.
Right.
And television only became important with Eisenhower.
Right. And meanwhile, Edward R. Murrow,
he was a pioneer. He started on radio.
Yeah, of the television era. And so when he attacked McCarthy, I think that was one of the most powerful moments in journalism.
Yeah.
Especially broadcast journalism.
One of the bad things I saw when I lived on the West Coast, because of the 3-hour time difference, is that when these stations would make these projections, even on the presidential level, that such and such is going to win or whatever. In Los Angeles, you got people standing in line for 45 minutes to an hour just to get in to vote.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times when they would get that news, they just drop out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, and it's kind of sad too, because you have people standing in line, like you're saying, and the TV news will come on and say, with 1% of precincts reporting,
exactly.
And they call the race. And in a way, it's disenfranchising, I think, to the people who are left in line and haven't voted yet.
And Jimmy Carter learned that lesson to his end of his campaign. You see, he made a huge mistake when he lost in 1980. Mm-hmm. NBC or somebody said, 7 o'clock, Carter lost, Reagan wins.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then Carter closed up shop, went home, went to bed. Yeah. That was one of the stupidest things on Carter's part, because the Senate races were still important.
Right.
So they really raked Carter over the coals.
I'm sure they did.
For announcing the defeat, because that's when they started to go back. So they have delayed it a little bit.
Yeah.
When you saw it, it wasn't as severe as Carter.
Right. But you remember when in the 2000 race, the Gore-Bush race?
Yeah, what happened
then?
They
announced that Bush had won, and even Bush called and congratulated, I mean, not Bush, Gore called and congratulated Bush, I think.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, no, it's not,
Yeah, he did the concession call.
And I don't know, how many days did that go on after the general election?
Oh, you mean the recount of Florida?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It was like, I want to say it was like 6 weeks or something.
I think so.
Yeah, those were the hanging chads.
Yeah. Well, Well, I think that we probably have to take a station break soon, but
Yeah, we do. If we could take one.
okay, we'll take one now.
Okay. Well, we'll want to say something about these polls. I just want to put up a couple of charts here. This first chart is from USA Today, and this shows you how they ask very deceiving questions. This is Robert Whaley, historian, and we're discussing with David Dewitt the manipulation of polls by television. And we have here a sample from USA Today, which shows this little chart.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
And the questions are, you have four choices. You can vote for yes or no. Do you trust the system? Well, what does this word system mean? Does that mean, do you trust Hillary or Trump personally? Is that the system? Or are you talking about the Constitution? Are we talking about the media?
Or the way the system conducts the polls.
Yeah. You can define system anyway, see. So back in the old days, when we had Gallup asked only one simple question in 1948. Who do you want? Dewey or Truman? They didn't have these 4 or 5 different questions where you have maybe, you see, they have four different ways you can answer. You can say, we're very sure, we're somewhat sure, we're not totally, and then we're totally against, you see. So these things come out with 4 different choices, you see. In other words, Donald Trump gets 38% very certain for his supporters. And then Hillary only gets, no, she gets more. She gets 49%. But then when you look at the last one, Trump has 13% totally out of it, and Hillary gets only 2% negatives. So she has less negatives, and Trump has more negatives. That's what it proves. But I still don't know what the vagueness between that poll deceives the voters of what they really think. We don't really know. I don't know what either Trump or Hillary really believes. So that's how polls deceive. So we'll have to stop our polling at this point and jump
Well,
up.
we got a couple.
You want to look at the New York Times poll? There's another example of manipulated polls. The first poll, the little poll, asked this question about, here's the question, very vague question. Would you describe electing Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump as president as safe or risky for the country? Well, who knows what is safe and what is risky? Some people are afraid of their next door neighbor who might own a gun. Some people are afraid of terrorism in the Middle East. Who knows what feeling safe means, okay? So that poll is a kind of an interest, doesn't mean much to me. But anyway, the results are that 47% of the Clinton people say they're safe, 30% are safe with Trump. Risky, 51% for Clinton, but 67% for Trump. It's a fixed poll to help Clinton and weaken Trump. That's what it is, in my opinion. Okay, let's look at this.
Yeah.
The second 4 questions. This is a more subtle question, they ask 4 different questions on this second poll. The first question is, do you think Hillary or Donald Trump is honest and trustworthy? Yes or no? Well, who knows what honest and trustworthy means? I thought Bernie Sanders was more honest than any of the so-called Christians. But I'm a minority of one, I think. Of course, the Jews all would vote the way I did. But most of the Jews still voted for Hillary. They thought Hillary was more, because Bernie was too trustful for them, because Bernie was suspicious of Israel, you see. That's the problem. The Jews are divided between American liberals and the so-called neoconservatives. Well, I don't know what honesty and trustworthy means. Okay, the second question is, who has the right kind of temperament and personality to be a good president? Oh, what is a personality? Personality is created by television. That's image. Nobody asked the question about, does Truman have a good personality? What about Franklin Roosevelt? Does he have a good personality? Who knows? Nobody tested Eisenhower's personality. They said Eisenhower was a hero in World War II. What stupid questions. So then the third question is, which one of these candidates shares your values? My God, what is a value?
It's also relative, and it's also speculative.
Well,
it
I
could
believe
mean anything to anybody. It would mean something completely different to you than it might mean to me.
Absolutely. My values are Protestant Christianity. I think that the Protestants have better values than the Catholics. I think the Protestants have better values than Jews. But the Jews and the Catholics will vote quite differently because they're thinking of different values. Just meaningless.
I don't even know where to say what my values are.
Who knows what Trump believes as a Presbyterian? When he's had
Aristotelian
divorcees.
pantheism, maybe? I don't know.
He's had divorcees. He's had all kinds of sex scandals.
Maybe
Values.
Socratean pantheism.
Okay. Well, anyway, the fourth question is, could you bring about real change in the way things are done in Washington?
What does real change mean? Again, we're faced with definitional dilemmas with each one of these questions.
They're terrible questions. So that's how New York Times says, okay, it's getting close now. It's 2% for both sides. They've made the polls that were very divided at the end of Philadelphia come closer together.
Yes.
And they're making the race go longer and longer because
the media wants it to be a race.
They make money.
Exactly. They make money when it's a close
That's
race.
right.
They want people
They don't
to.
want it to be a pushover for either party.
Well,
so I guess
absolutely
that's
not.
all I want to say about that. And we want to change this subject altogether.
Is there one more you want to look at, Robert?
We'll skip it. We haven't got time. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll pick that up next week. But what we want to do now.
I just wanted to ask you, Robert.
All right, we'll have one more question on the polls.
Okay, if, let's say that these questions were written in the same manner, straightforward. If you were to have the Washington Post and the Washington Times conduct legitimate polls.
What do you mean by legitimate? The Times writes its own polls. The Post writes a different poll. They word
Well,
the
I know
question.
there would be two different polls, of course, because they're two different papers, and they have two different ways of looking at things.
Right.
You know, the Times is a conservative
Right.
paper, and
Right.
the Post
Right.
is a more liberal.
Fox Channel has its own poll.
Right, but I was just wondering when you have, but if you would ask the same exact questions.
But who writes the question? Who's the umpire? Who's God? That's the point.
Let's say that you would write the questions.
I'm only a historian.
Yeah.
Now, if we had
I'm just wondering what the results would be.
quite different.
They would be quite different
Right.
from a liberal paper.
Right.
And
If I went
so
to
I think in my estimation of polls, and I think I've had this conversation with you in the past,
Right.
they're very misleading.
Very misleading. Absolutely. Now, let's look at the interesting poll is, what do you think of the Douglas-Lincoln debates? Who did the polling there? Nobody. They had no poll.
No.
All they had was a moderator who kept the
Right.
clock.
Right,
You have 5 minutes.
right.
Now, how many Lincoln-Douglas debates do you think they
It's
had?
been years since I've you know.
Do you think they
have
had one
read
debate,
that, but,
two debates? How many debates did they have?
You would know better than me. You're
They had
the
about 40 or 50 debates.
over a period of time.
They
and-
began debating in 1850. 1850, the Southerners passed the act to round up slaves that escaped to the North.
Right.
So they had a debate. Should we allow Southern prosecutors to come back
Right.
and pick up slaves and bring them back to the South?
And the Douglas.
And then they had debates over the
Right.
the Dred Scott case.
Debates were
Long.
considered the in history, as far as history is concerned,
Absolutely.
They're the debates.
Yeah, but they were real debates.
They were, yes.
They weren't television performances.
Right.
You know, Lincoln was debating against the 14th president, who was a Whig.
Yeah.
He was a Whig from New Hampshire, who sold out to the South.
Yeah.
And Buchanan was elected as the 15th president.
Yeah.
Buchanan came from Pennsylvania, but he lived about 10 miles from the Mason-Dixon line. And all of his friends were Southern senators. So Buchanan led to the Civil War. So they were debating about how you're going to Kansas-Nebraska bill. They had 6 or 7 debates about that. Who's got the right to go into Kansas and arrest? And how do you enforce the Jayhawk War?
Right.
So there were dozens of Lincoln. I don't think anybody's ever totaled them.
Another thing about these debates, like the Lincoln-Douglas debates, is you didn't have moderators
No.
from some network asking
Nothing.
the questions.
All right. Now, when Lincoln got elected, there were 4 candidates. Lincoln ran against Douglas, the traditional Democrat, but then there were 2 center parties from Kansas and Kentucky that didn't want to secede. So you had a guy by the name of Bell and another guy by the name of Breckinridge, and they were trying to prevent secession. Well, Lincoln won by the electoral votes because the Democrats, Douglas lost on the Electoral College because the Southerners and the Whigs just exploded. That's what they led to, a 4-party race.
Yeah, in 1860.
Yeah.
Right, which made Lincoln a minority president as well.
No, he won in the Electoral College.
Well, yeah, I just mean
But he was close
It
in
was
the
a
electoral
4-way
vote.
race. Yeah.
But he had it close in the electoral votes.
Yeah. I think didn't Douglas only win one state?
Douglas
And-
only won one
and
state.
Calhoun won most of the South.
Well, Calhoun wasn't in it. It was
No, it was, what was that guy's? Lincoln's cousin, right? Or
no,
Mary's cousin.
Wait a
but,
minute, wait. There was Lincoln and Douglas. They were the big names.
Right.
But you had a guy by the name of Breckinridge from Kentucky.
Right, and he
And
won
a guy by the name of
Kentucky.
Bell. And they set up the Constitutional Party.
Right, Breckinridge is the one that I was talking about. He was cousins with Mary Todd.
That may well be. Yes,
Yeah.
that may well be.
Yeah.
And-
Calhoun was dead by that time.
Yeah, they didn't want to secede.
Kentucky, right, no.
Neither one of them wanted to secede.
Right,
Because they were border states.
Right.
So it was the old Jackson, John Quincy Adams debate. See, the big debate is who said that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. Well, Douglas and Lincoln were debating that. Was it unconstitutional? And then they got into Taney and
right.
was Dred Scott a human being or a slave? Of property? Who was he?
Right.
Well, that just annoyed Massachusetts, Connecticut, all of the liberal states. They said, we can't have that. So,
What year was the Dred Scott
1858.
decision? Yeah.
He came from, he was a slaveholder And you know the Catholic Church got involved in that.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
know that Kaine was the first Roman Catholic Chief Justice? And the papal nuncio got his name into that by talking about, well, we got to protect the rights of Catholic Irish. Well, that backfired. That led to the so-called Know Nothing Party.
Yeah.
The Know Nothing Party took the state of Massachusetts. The Know Nothing Party was a kind of a beginning of the Ku Klux Klan. They just said, well, we don't want any immigrants, but if anybody asks you, you just say you know nothing. That's how they got the name, the Know Nothing. That wasn't the official name of it. It was a secret organization. It was called the Star Spangled Banner Committee. Well, the Know Nothing Party only lasted for one election, and then it collapsed. I think it was in the congressional elections of 1858, before the 1860. The Know Nothing took Massachusetts in 1858, and then in 1860, Massachusetts went with the Republican Party
Right, okay.
on anti-slavery,
Yeah,
and the immigration question was forgotten.
right.
And the Catholic issue was forgotten. Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, anyway, we've introduced ourselves now to real debates, and I want to go on to projection now for the first debate at Hempstead, Hofstra College. I want to say that I came from that county. Main Street, Hempstead, runs right into Baldwin. It becomes Baldwin Avenue, and it runs into the bay. So I knew all about Hofstra College as a kid, and it was a few miles from my house, and so it's very familiar to me. But so do you want to say anything more about the introduction to that? Or shall we get into the real heart of this? And that is the question of the Constitution. The question here is, I have like 4 questions. First question would be, we've had 44 presidents. Who is your favorite model as a president for Trump and Hillary at this time? Do you have that's the kind of a question I would like to see the debaters bring up. I would like to have the debaters ask the candidates. Mr. Trump, Hillary Clinton, we've had these 44 presidents. Who is your model as a president? What do you think they would answer? You don't have any speculation on that.
I think that I don't know who they would answer. Would Trump play the typical card and play Saint Reagan probably?
He would probably say Reagan.
Because that's the political answer. And Hillary's political answer would probably be her husband, right? I mean,
that's what she might say.
You really think she would do that?
But
I don't know what she would say.
I don't think that she should.
But I'm going to tell you what.
I think she was a big fan of FDR and his wife. You know?
Yeah,
she might
probably.
say that.
I think domestically that she should probably look at, honestly, most of the domestic agenda of Lyndon Johnson.
Okay.
The Great Society,
Okay.
the War on Poverty agenda.
Okay. Going back now before the TV age.
I think obviously the 2 best presidents we've ever had are Lincoln and FDR,
Right.
bar none.
And when Lincoln ran, he had a model, George Washington.
Right.
He didn't have any doubt that he was going to fulfill Washington's promise.
Yeah.
And when Roosevelt ran, he had a model, Woodrow Wilson. Mm-hmm. He was going to try and perpetuate the League of Nations, the United Nations, and he was going to have to intervene and fight Germany again. He knew exactly who his model was. Mm-hmm. And Eisenhower had a model. Eisenhower was the victor in World War II, and his model was General Marshall. He knew who he wanted,
Now, Robert, is your favorite president Lincoln and FDR? Would that be?
I would say Washington first, Lincoln
Oh, okay,
second,
yeah.
and Franklin D. Roosevelt third.
Okay.
But all three had a model of what they wanted to be
You know
like.
what I'm saying? David mentioned his Lincoln and FDR.
Yeah.
I would almost bet that you were guessing what Trump would say. I would say Trump is going to say Lincoln and Reagan.
I'd be surprised. Well, they're probably
You
not
don't
going to
think
ask.
he'd pick Reagan?
I have no idea what Trump would say, but I don't think the pundits are going to ask that question.
Oh, no, they're not.
Okay, this would be my second question I would like to see them say. Do you believe that the survival of democracy is dependent on the survival of Christianity?
Do I believe that?
No, that's what I would ask the candidates.
Oh, okay. I see.
Okay. Does American youth?
He's not going to put you on the spot, David.
No,
All right.
you don't have to answer. You're only the
I didn't know if you're asking me.
No,
I mean,
no.
I'd be
This is
happy
what I
to
would like
answer,
to see.
but you'd like to see this.
I would like to see the pundits say that to Hillary and Trump. Do you believe that the survival of democracy is dependent on the teaching of American youth to face up to the basic principles of Judaism or Christianity? How's that? Is that a good question?
I think it
Provocative?
would, it is certainly a provocative question, and I'd be interested to see their answers. I'd expect both of them to say yes to some degree.
Well, they have
because
to
they're-
elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, because they're,
Okay, question three.
I would bet that, you elaborate a little bit. I bet it would be a little bit.
yeah, they wouldn't want to go too far out.
Okay,
onto
here's
any
my third
ledge.
question, my third possible question. I don't think they're going to do it, but
No.
this is a way of seeing, can they live up to my ideal? That's my question. Third question is, both the Democrats and Republicans could have usually said that they would defend the Constitution of the United States. Fine. Which three articles would you think would be the most important to reaffirm?
I think that's a great question. That's my favorite question so far.
Right. You would like to see them do that.
Well, I would like for Trump to demonstrate that he has any idea what is contained within the
I don't know
Constitution.
if either one of them would be able to answer that.
Okay. My fourth question is, both of you have said that amounts. Both of you have said that you would have a that you would both of you agree. This is that both of you would agree that the recovery of the infrastructure is the most important first priority. My question is, what kinds of taxes would you levy to pay for that infrastructure? What do you think they would say?
Oh, I think that Trump would probably talk about pivoted supply side stuff about cutting taxes.
Well, then he's not going to build many highways. He's not going to fix many water pipes.
I don't think he has any interest in doing this.
He's going to flunk that.
Yeah.
And Sanders would have an answer. You got to tax Wall Street.
Well, Sanders
And-
would tax. Yeah, he would
and-
tax capital gains. He would tax Wall Street. He
If
would
we
tax
can
the
get
top
Hillary to confess to
1%.
some taxation, she might win the debate.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's my predictions of things to come, or things not to come, or what we should be looking forward to next week.
I have one question to add
Good.
to it for
Good.
for you.
What would be your favorite?
My question would be, whenever they talk about what they want to do in the Middle East or anywhere else throughout international, what the role America is going to play militarily throughout the rest of the world, how will you pay for it?
Right. Same question.
Finally, get them to answer how
Right.
they intend to pay for any of that, because they're going to be asked how they're going to pay for their education plan and their health care plan
Right.
and anything domestically. I don't know why there's this kibosh on asking you how you're going to pay for international adventure.
Well, that's the veterans' vote.
Yeah.
They're not going to insult the veterans. Well, I guess we've come to the end. Thanks again. Yeah, we want to. Well, yeah. Do you want to recapitulate the relationship of polls and predictions of this?
Well, I think that we
first
talked
debate?
generally about how polls can be very misleading, both in their results and their influence upon voters themselves. I think sometimes they're self-fulfilling prophecy in that they tell voters this is what people are thinking, and people think, oh, well, that must be the truth. And so I think that you have to approach any poll with a certain sense of skepticism and critical thinking, and really try to think definitionally about what the words within the questions actually mean and to whom,
Right.
and what difference that makes.
Okay, well, my summary would be, I hope that more Americans read George Orwell, because he exposes propaganda better than any American pundit. And I thank you for coming. This is called Athens Speakout, and this is called Debate is the Oxygen of Democracy. Let's bring back the real Douglas Lincoln debates.